Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the SLA Industries 2nd edition core rulebook. If you haven't seen the other parts of this review, featuring this splatterpunk sci-fi noir experience, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about combat. Life as an operative is dangerous. Even the bureaucrats carry a gun and need to know how to use it. Mort is a violent place. Street gangs, the skin trade, carrion breaking in from the sewers, and now the newest threat, incantations of the Xi'an blood cult. Sooner or later, whether they go looking for it or not, an SLA operative is going to find themselves in a hostile situation which they will need to shoot or hack their way out of. So let's talk about initiative. Before actions are selected during a combat round, it is also important to consider the order in which these actions are resolved. Initiative is a measure of a combatant's reaction speed to dangerous situations and serves to determine the order in which actions are selected and performed. A combatant with a particularly high initiative will be able to analyze the scene quickly, identifying what other participants of the combat are likely to do, and react to that by taking the first action. At the opposite end of the spectrum, a combatant with a low initiative will be slower to react, committing to the first decision that comes to mind and acting after others have already done so. A character's initiative bonus is equal to their dex and concentration stats added together. This value is used during combat when determining initiative values and is recorded on the character sheet. When combat begins, each combatant calculates their initiative value by rolling a d10 and adding the initiative bonus. The total value is the combatant's initiative value for the first combat round. Any ties are broken by whichever combatant has the highest rank in the detect skill. Should there still be a draw at this point, the drawn combatants are considered to act simultaneously, selecting and resolving their actions at the same time. When this happens, it is suggested that combatants write down their actions and reveal them together, though the game master is free to handle this in whatever way they best see fit. Once initiative is determined, all participants in the combat take turns selecting an action for the combat round, starting with the lowest initiative value. After all combatants have selected an action, these actions are performed in order, starting with the highest initiative value, of course, and there are a few rules that cause characters to automatically act last, ignoring the normal initiative order. For example, characters with the pacifist trait, characters who are stunned, or characters who are influenced by fear. Just to give you a few related situations, all of these characters act last. If any rule permits a character to take an additional action during a combat round, for example under the effect of the rush combat drug, that action is declared at the same time as it is performed, rather than when declaring initiative. Sometimes the players will come up against a large number of enemies of the same type that have the same initiative bonus, such as a huge swarm of rats or a whole pack of carrion. When this happens, the game master should feel free to make a single initiative roll for the group of enemies, rather than making a large number of separate rolls. In this way, pack mentality comes into play, allowing a swarm to maximize their strengths and move or attack together. Now let's talk about combat rounds and actions. During regular gameplay, it is not normally required to organize the game into a rigid order of who does what first, as the fluidity of good role-playing comes from talking that out as a group. However, when in combat, the matter of who shoots first can be the difference between life and death. To represent this, all combat situations are organized into combat rounds. During a single combat round, each combatant will take a single action. They could perhaps move or charge. They could perform a hand-to-hand action or ranged action. They could recover, that is, a penalty action taken to recover from a stumble or jam a weapon. They could calculate the ebb, and we will talk about the ebb in a future part of this review. Or they could carry out auxiliary actions, such as injecting combat drugs, changing weapons, picking up an object, etc. When every participant has completed an action during the combat round, a new combat round will begin, with all remaining participants selecting a new action. This process repeats until the combat ends. A single combat round is considered to last 3 seconds. Occasionally, after declaring an action, but before a combatant gets to act, situations may arise that prevent the chosen action from being performed. This is referred to as a failed action. In these situations, a combatant may instead perform an auxiliary action. Alternatively, the combatant may perform a hand-to-hand attack, ranged attack, or calculate the action, but will apply a negative modifier to all dice during these skill rolls made in relation to that particular action. Now, concerning movement, outside of combat, players and the game master may use the relative closing and rushing speeds of each species to determine their relevant speed compared to each other. During combat, it becomes more important to track movement more precisely, allowing players to judge the distance between themselves and their enemies. As such, the stated closing and rushing speeds for each species represents a character's pace of movement under the duress of a combat situation. While attacking characters are able to move as a part of performing an attack, at times characters will simply want to move about at a faster pace. To represent this, there are two different movement actions that may be undertaken during combat: move and charge. Let's talk about move first. Movement during combat is measured in short distances. While people are unlikely to be doing a great deal of walking during a firefight, short dashes to reposition, gain better cover, or close the distance to the enemy are often the aspects of combat that turn the tide on the outcome of a battle. A combatant may move up to their rushing speed in meters as their action. This represents the combatant dashing at full pace to take cover or move in the opposition. In addition, it is worth noting that a moving target becomes harder to hit than a stationary one. Movement up to a character's closing speed may be performed as part of a hand-to-hand or ranged attack, though such actions become easier if time is taken to steady a weapon rather than move. When it comes to charging into combat is a risky but potentially deadly maneuver. The movement will result in both combatants being locked in hand-to-hand combat, but with the added benefit of the charging impact. The downside to such a maneuver is that it can be hard to stop and maintain balance if the strike is unsuccessful. An attack is considered a charge when a combatant starts their action at least 3 meters from an opponent and chooses to move up to their rushing speed, plowing full force into their target. The charging combatant must have a line of sight to their target at the start of the action. Charging an opponent gives the potential to inflict additional damage, as explained in the hand-to-hand combat section. Now, concerning move and charge actions versus initiative, as actions are declared in reverse order, it would stand to reason that anyone who has a charge or move which ends in hand-to-hand combat, declared against them by a combatant with a lower initiative value, could just choose to move backwards, thus moving out of the range of the incoming attacker. While this may seem like a good option for more fragile operatives, turning a combat into a chase, the game master should make it clear that most enemy combatants are not easily fooled. Repeated use of combatants moving backwards to lure charging opponents whilst other squad members shoot them, or to ensure that they can never be reached by the opposition, should be punished accordingly. Leading the retreating operative into a dead end or ambush will help them learn their lesson. And remember, combats in SLA Industries are televised. Operatives that are constantly running away could be considered cowards by the audience. Now let's talk about hand-to-hand combat. This is combat using fists, teeth, blades, or other close-range weaponry. This is the benchmark of operative capability. While gun sales are significant, the high rate of bullet tax makes firing your rifle an expensive proposition. On top of that, TV ratings logged by Gore Zone, The Killing Floor, and Crunch Time have all proven time and time again that melee weapons, martial arts, and stormers pulling people's arms off are exactly what people want to see. On the streets of Mort, civilians, gang members, and other unsavories will arm themselves with knives, bats, chains, and all manner of other accessible weapons. For operatives, the melee weapon catalog is far more diverse, from powered swords and fists to the feared chain axe. Each melee weapon has its own profile with several details. So you have data on skill, that is the skill used when performing an attack with a particular weapon. You also have damage, which is the amount of damage inflicted by a successful attack with the weapon. There's also minimum damage. This is the minimum amount of damage that the weapon will inflict. You also have AD, or armor damage. This is inflicted to the target's armor. There's also information on specific rules that apply to a particular weapon. When performing hand-to-hand combat, the combatant may move up to their closing speed in meters before performing the attack, providing they are not already engaged in hand-to-hand combat. This allows them to close a small distance, allowing them to strike. Effectively, every combatant has an area around them equal to their closing speed that they can attack in hand-to-hand combat without the need to take other actions. All attacks require an active skill roll, regardless of the user's proficiency with a weapon or combat style. The skill roll is made as normal, rolling the success die and one skill die for each rank that a character has in the applicable weapon skill, plus 1, and adding the relevant skill bonus or stat to each die. However, the normal skill roll difficulties and target numbers do not apply during attack rolls. Instead, there is always a static target number of 10, to which a range of modifiers may apply. Thus, any result of 10 or more after adjustments indicates a hit, and there are going to be hand-to-hand combat modifiers. It is possible for multiple modifiers to apply to a single roll. While most modifiers will be added or subtracted from the value rolled, some instead add automatic skill dice successes to the number of successes rolled. So different situations such as charging a target, when a target uses combat defense, when a target uses acrobatic defense, when the target is performing a break-off this combat round, or attacking with a natural weapon, all of these will apply positive or negative modifiers to your roll. When it comes to defensive maneuvers, the biggest potential for modifying an attacker's roll to hit comes from the defender performing a defensive maneuver, either using their agility to dodge, dive, and flip out of harm's way, or to use their own weapon proficiency to parry or guard against the incoming attack. Due to the availability of defensive maneuvers during hand-to-hand combat, anyone may opt to reserve ranks of their relevant combat skill in order to perform a combat defense if they expect to get hit later in the combat round. Let's talk about combat defense first. The combatant being attacked may opt to defend themselves using their current hand-to-hand weapon or fighting style. To do so, the defender may allocate any number of ranks of the chosen skill, that is unarmed combat, melee weapons, or polearm, according to the weapon they are currently armed with. As action takes place quickly, it is not possible for someone to decide to draw a weapon for the purpose of switching to a different skill. Combat defense must be performed with whatever is in hand. Each rank allocated in this way applies a negative modifier to all dice being rolled by the attacker. When it comes to acrobatic defense, a defender may choose to use their acrobatics skill to sidestep or dodge out of harm's way during hand-to-hand combat. For each rank that the defender has in the acrobatic skill, the attacker applies a negative modifier to all dice being rolled. Now, when it comes to resolving hand-to-hand attacks specifically, if the roll to hit was a failure, the attacker's action ends immediately, and play continues to the next combatant's action. The result of a serious failure during a hand-to-hand attack represents the attacker stumbling or losing grip on their weapon. To represent this, the only action that combatant may take during the next combat round is the recover action, during which they may do nothing as they compose themselves. If the roll to hit is a success, the defender has been struck by the attack and will suffer damage according to the profile of the weapon. Margin of success is used during attacks to modify the damage inflicted by the strike. Then there is break-off. When combatants are locked in hand-to-hand combat, they are considered to be engaged. An engaged combatant may only leave combat if their opponents are incapacitated or choose to break off, nor may they take any other action besides attacking, calculating the ebb, or performing a break-off themselves. As such, engaged combatants will generally either attack their opponent or attempt to flee the combat. When a character chooses to break off from an engagement, the combatant is able to move up to their rushing speed, providing the movement does not move them into another hand-to-hand engagement. Once the break-off action is selected, the combatant will automatically move to the end of the initiative queue, acting last in this combat round. Now, concerning natural weapons as well as the ability to punch and kick, a number of creatures possess natural weapons such as sharp teeth or claws. Natural weapons all use the unarmed combat skill for the purposes of resolving attacks. Note that the use of armor may prevent natural weapons from being used. For example, wearing a helmet prevents the use of teeth, and wearing armored gauntlets prevents the use of claws. Back to break-off, I also wanted to add that when you carry out that maneuver, you become easier to hit. Turning your back on an opponent is a dangerous prospect. Now, concerning ranged combat, firefights are swift, brutal, and expensive. Since the bullet tax was implemented, drastically raising the cost of ammunition, more and more operatives have turned to melee weapons to satisfy their needs. This has not stopped the arms companies continuing to manufacture firearms by the millions. Like melee weapons, you also have technical details on the weapons. That is the skill, the damage, the minimum damage, the armor damage, and the rate of fire, which tells us how many rounds the weapon is capable of firing in a single volley. There's also recoil. The recoil of a weapon is a measure of its kick, or how hard it is to keep steady when firing. There's also range, that is the maximum effective range of the weapon. There is also clip, the amount of ammunition held in a single clip or magazine. And we have the weight factor and rules that apply to a particular ranged weapon. When performing a ranged attack, the combatant may move up to their closing speed before performing the attack, providing they are not already engaged in hand-to-hand combat. As with hand-to-hand combat, all ranged attacks require an active skill roll, regardless of the user's proficiency with a weapon. The skill roll is made as normal, rolling the success die and one skill die for each rank that a character has in the applicable weapon skill, plus 1, and adding the relevant skill bonus or stat to each die. It is handled similarly in certain ways when compared to melee weapons. Now, concerning line of sight and firing blind, in most cases a line of sight is required to a target in order for a ranged attack to be able to be made. Knowing a target's location may be sufficient if using a weapon capable of punching through a wall or barricade, though such shots may only be attempted under the game master's discretion, applying the modifiers for both heavy cover and blind firing. A line of sight is not required to a target in order to throw a grenade. And there are also going to be ranged attack modifiers, of course, concerning the recoil, when you are firing blind, when you are dual wielding, if the target is in light or heavy cover, if you are aiming. All of that will add a positive or negative modifier to your roll. Now, when it comes to cover, standing in the open in the middle of a firefight is a recipe for disaster. Instead, most combatants will take cover, at least until the capabilities of the enemy can be assessed. So you have details on light cover, which includes objects with low stopping power, but that are capable of concealing at least half of the target or obscuring their shape sufficiently. You also have heavy cover, which is cover that conceals the vast majority of a target or offers exceptionally high protective qualities, such as solid concrete walls, steel barriers, and most vehicles. Of course, heavy cover is going to grant you better cover than light cover. You also have concealed. A concealed target cannot be seen, but the fighter is aware of their presence, either through observation or the use of thermal optics. Firing at a concealed target comes with the same modifier as firing at a target in heavy cover. In addition, this sort of cover can grant you a positive modifier when it comes to the defensive functionality of said cover. Now, concerning aiming, rather than attacking, a combatant may choose to aim with a ranged weapon in order to increase the effectiveness of the eventual shot. While a combatant may aim for as many rounds as they wish, they may only gain a maximum number of aim bonuses equal to the rank in the relevant weapon skill. When the aiming combatant finally decides to fire, they may apply a positive modifier to the success die, or even add one automatic skill die success to the roll. A combination of both options may be used during the same ranged attack. Also, Many weapons are capable of different fire modes, allowing the user to opt for a single accurate shot or a volley of multiple rounds. But a weapon must have a required number of rounds left in its clip in order to use a specific fire mode. So you can get quite creative when it comes to ranged attacks. You can even carry out suppressive fire. Now, when it comes to dual wielding, it is the act of firing two weapons at the same time, either at the same target or at different targets. Such an act may be cinematic, but the ability to fire weapons accurately in this way is not easy. A character may fire using dual wielding as a single action, allowing them to fire two weapons, albeit at a significant cost in accuracy. Now, when resolving ranged attacks, if the roll to hit was a failure, the attacker's action ends immediately and play continues to the next combatant's action. If the result is a serious failure during a ranged attack, it represents the attacker's weapon jamming. A jammed weapon must be cleared before it can be used again. To reflect this, the only action that combatants may take during the next combat round is the recover action, during which they may do nothing as they unjam their weapons. If the roll to hit is a success, the round has hit its target and damage will be inflicted according to the profile of the weapon. Margin of success is used during attacks to modify the damage inflicted by the shot. Now, concerning grenades and thrown weapons, grenades are commonplace in the operative toolkit, despite the significant price hikes they have received over recent years. Thrown weapons work like other ranged attacks and are resolved using the throw skill. The effective range of all thrown weapons is based on the user's strength. You have a table to determine that. The normal modifiers for long range are applied, though in the case of grenades, no modifier is applied for firing blind, on account of them not needing to hit a target dead on. So you have details on the blast radius, that is the area affected by the explosion. And when it comes to resolving attacks with grenades, they do not need to target a specific objective, and can instead be thrown within the general vicinity of the target or targets. All normal rules for ranged attacks apply. However, in addition to any modifiers, at least one skill die success is also required to land the grenade on the intended target. Now, you could be thinking, what happens when you fire at engaged targets? Firing into an existing hand-to-hand combat situation is a dangerous prospect. With the constant unpredictable movements of close combat, it becomes increasingly hard to be sure which target will be hit. Even the most talented snipers must take the risk of friendly fire. Combatants may fire at targets who are engaged in hand-to-hand combat as normal. However, at least one skill die success is also required to hit the intended target. If the success die results in a success with no additional skill die successes, then the actual target hit must be randomized between all those involved in the engagement. And lastly, concerning these types of combat actions, there's also auxiliary actions. During combat, there are a number of simple activities which may need to take place. While different actions may take slightly different lengths of time, in the interests of keeping the action running smoothly, all of the following actions are considered possible for an auxiliary action during a combat round. So we have changing to a different weapon, picking up a dropped weapon or item, standing up if prone, injecting a dose of drugs, using a medkit, using a flux gem, just to give you some examples. And this concludes the review for today. As you can see, combat is quite involved. It is not exactly as complex as other more simulationist games, but I would say that it is of a medium complexity. When you get used to it, it flows smoothly, but first you need to consider those modifiers and those combat actions, or rather combat options. So for those of you that want plenty of options during a single combat round, I think you are going to love this system. In the next part of the review, we are going to talk about damage, ratings, points, the use of vehicles, and many other things. Thank you for watching this part of the review, and thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.